1:15. This is the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. The news edited by Romesh Piris, read by Sounditavam. The Premier emphasises that the people's support is essential to save the country from the coronavirus epidemic. The decision on extending the lockdown is to be taken today. The national vaccination drive is being ramped up in all districts by the Ministry of Health and the Army. A rise in COVID daily figures due to the New Year cluster. All citizens above 18 years of age to be vaccinated before the end of November. The Speaker of the Parliament signs the COVID-19 Temporary Provisions Bill. The SLBC is ready to promote local banks to attract foreign investments to the country. In international news, the US braces for more possible attacks after deadly Kabul blasts. In sports cricket, Joe Root's third century in 3 tests punishes tourists. Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa emphasises that the support of the people is essential at this moment to save the country from the current coronavirus epidemic. Speaking to the media at Temple Trees, the Premier said, closing the country for a long time is not a practical solution. Accordingly, the Prime Minister said, the people too should act responsibly when the country is reopened. The Premier further emphasised that the leading team involved in coronavirus control activities, including health and security, is currently fulfilling its role by putting their lives on the line, and that this is the best opportunity for the people to express their support for the country in such a backdrop. The Health Ministry says a decision on extending the lockdown will be taken today. The Director General of Health Services, Dr. Asela Gunawardena, said that the decision will be taken at the COVID Task Force meeting chaired by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The rise in the number of deaths and the number of people infected will be considered when deciding if the lockdown is to be extended or not. The lockdown was imposed last Friday and is set to be lifted on Monday, the 30th of August. The Ministry of Health and the Sri Lanka Army are proceeding with COVID vaccinations today, ramping up the national inoculation drive. Accordingly, the Health Ministry will roll out the Sinopharm vaccinations for people in Colombo, Gampaha, Kalutara, Galle, Matara, Hambantota, Nuwara, Ratnapura, Kurunegala, Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa, Monaragala, Badulla, Mullaitivu, Kilinochchi, Jaffna, Batticaloa, Ampara and the Kalmune districts. The second dose of the Moderna vaccine will be administered at multiple schools in the Kandy district, and the AstraZeneca first doses are being rolled out in the Kayagala district at all MOH offices and through mobile vaccination teams. Vaccination clinics for the second dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech jab are being held in Mahawava, Nathandiya, Puttalam, Vennappur, Mundal and the Arachikattua MOH areas in the Puttalam district. Both doses of the Pfizer vaccine will be rolled out in the Mannar district. More details on the inoculation centres operated by the Health Ministry can be obtained from its official website, health.gov.lk. That's health.gov.lk. Meanwhile, another 2 million doses of the Chinese-manufactured Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccine will reach Sri Lanka tomorrow. The Chinese embassy in Sri Lanka in a tweet said, Sinopharm confirmed that the consignment will be delivered to Sri Lanka. The embassy said 7 million doses of the Sinopharm vaccine have been supplied to Sri Lanka in the month of August alone. Sri Lanka has thus far received 18 million Sinopharm vaccine doses. Moreover, 384,091 vaccine doses were administered in Sri Lanka yesterday. Overall, 6,464,296 Sri Lankans have thus far been fully vaccinated. The Ministry of Health confirmed as many as 3,522 persons have tested positive for the coronavirus yesterday. All the new cases are associated with the New Year COVID-19 cluster. The new development brings the total number of COVID-19 cases confirmed in the country thus far to 411,290. At present, more than 52,000 virus-infected patients are receiving medical care at hospitals, treatment centres and homes. The tally of total recoveries reached 351,069 today, as 2,139 more patients were discharged after returning to health. Meanwhile, the death toll from the novel coronavirus stands at over 7,900. The Minister of Health, Dr. Kelly Rambukwala, says that all citizens over the age of 18 will be fully vaccinated before the end of November. The Minister said that it is planned to complete the vaccination of all citizens over 30 years of age by mid-September. Dr. Rambukwella made this statement when he met the Cuban ambassador to Sri Lanka, Andres Garrido, on Thursday. The minister also requested the ambassador to provide an opportunity for an exchange program to share the experience, knowledge and technology of the world-class Cuban health service in Sri Lanka. The Secretary-General of Parliament, Dhammika Dasanayake, says that Speaker Mahindayapa Abeyewardena has signed the COVID-19 Temporary Provisions Bill. The bill was passed in Parliament without a vote on the 17th of August. The purpose of the bill was to make temporary provisions in relation to situations where people are unable to perform certain duties required by law within the prescribed time period due to the pandemic. It also allows the authorities to assign alternative codes where a court cannot function due to the virus and to conduct court proceedings using remote communication technology in order to help contain the spread of the virus. This news broadcast comes to you from the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. The former Prime Minister and the leader of the United National Party, Ranil Wickremesinghe, says the rapid spread of COVID must be prevented and measures need to be taken to prevent people being impacted by the COVID-19. In a statement, he said that the government declared a 10-day lockdown for this purpose. This has received everyone's support, but according to medical advice, this is not a sufficient period. Earlier, Wickremesinghe recommended to the head of state, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet of Ministers to extend this lockdown according to medical advice. The Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment says migrant workers who register under the Bureau will be given a vaccine accepted in the destination country. According to the Additional General Manager of the Bureau, Mangala Randhaniya, a registration fee of 16,416 rupees will be charged from migrant workers. Meanwhile, persons planning to go abroad are now able to obtain an online certificate to prove that they have been vaccinated the COVID-19 vaccine. The untiring efforts of the Army troops in order to expand the existing ward capacity at the Colombo South Teaching Hospital, in close consultation with health authorities, completed the establishment of 3 more new wards in the 8-story building in the hospital complex. The project, undertaken by the Army as per presidential directives, was fully supported by the Army Seva Vanita unit, and all 3 converted wards with 250 beds were formally vested with the Colombo South Teaching Hospital authorities by the Chief of Defence Staff and Commander of the Army, General Shavindra Silva, the head of the National Operations Centre for the Prevention of COVID-19 Outbreak, together with Sujiva Nelson, the President of the Army Seva Vanita unit, who was instrumental in providing the project with all accessories and furniture. That concludes local news.
The main news story is brought to you by Siddhalepa Vedamahatmya.
The chairman of the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation, Hudson Samarasinghe, says the corporation is ready to assist local banks to attract potential investments from abroad through advertising via the state broadcaster. Mr. Samarasinghe said that the government has taken steps to introduce special concessions on non-residents foreign currency accounts or NRFC accounts for Sri Lankans living overseas and foreign nationals to deposit their savings and other funds in Sri Lanka. In this backdrop, Mr. Samarasinghe stressed that the opportunity has risen for Sri Lankans and well-wishers living in Sri Lanka and abroad to extend a gesture of goodwill towards Sri Lanka and its people by investing in Sri Lanka. The chairman added the state broadcaster is prepared to advertise banking services in this country in multilingual languages such as Sinhala, Tamil, English and Malayalam, and came to you in the main news story.
The main news story was brought to you by Siddhalepa Vedamahatmya.
Moving on to Watchlight. The Commissioner General of Examinations, B. Sanat Pujita, says that application deadlines for certain examinations have been extended. Accordingly, students who have not yet been able to apply for the GCE Advanced Level and Grade 5 scholarship examinations will be given the opportunity to do so until September 15th, and came to you in Watchlight. On to a bulletin of world news making headlines. The US braces for more possible attacks after deadly Kabul blasts. The US Vice President ends Asia tour with fresh jab at China. And gunmen free kidnapped schoolchildren in Nigeria. US troops helping to evacuate Afghans desperate to flee Taliban rule braced for more attacks today, a day after an ISIS affiliated group struck the crowded gates at the Kabul airport, killing at least 60 civilians and 13 US troops. Videos shot by Afghan journalists showed dozens of bodies strewn around a canal on the edge of the airport. Witnesses said at least 2 blasts and gunfire rocked the area. The Islamic State in Khorasan province, ISKP, and ISIL offshoot in Afghanistan said one of its suicide bombers singled out translators and collaborators with the American army. The U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has declared, as she concluded a trip to Southeast Asia, that the United States welcomes competition and does not seek conflict with Beijing, but will speak up on issues like maritime disputes in the South China Sea. In visits to Singapore and Vietnam, Harris charged China with bullying its neighbors in the region, triggering sharp rebukes from Beijing, which accused the U.S. of meddling in regional affairs and disrupting the peace. Harris's 7-day trip to Singapore and Vietnam is part of a broader U.S. strategy to take on China globally. Gunmen in Nigeria have freed a number of pupils who have kidnapped from an Islamic school in May. Some 136 students from the school in Tejina, Niger State, were seized by gunmen demanding a ransom. School officials say 15 students escaped in June and a further 6 died while in captivity. Mass abductions for ransom have been increasingly common across Nigeria in recent months. Head teacher Abubakar Al-Hassan said he could not give an exact number of how many students have been freed, but said none of the pupils are in captivity. Back to the headlines of the world news. The U.S. braces for more possible attacks after deadly Kabul blasts. The U.S. Vice President ends Asia tour with fresh jab at China. And gunmen freed kidnapped schoolchildren in Nigeria. That concludes this bulletin of world news.
Development News is brought to you by Quality Matters Than Price. So as an engineer, I recommend Melba RB500. It's made with virgin billets using the latest technology. Melba RB500, number 1 in Sri Lanka. Truly Sri Lankan.
The construction of the 120-megawatt Samalalabhava power project commenced in 1986 and the reservoir filled for the first time in 1992. During the same time, it was revealed that there was a water leak in the reservoir. A number of studies conducted in this regard, but so far the leak route has not been identified. Due to this, the water leak, the volume of the reservoir is limited to 288 million cubic meters. Therefore, the power generation capacity of the Samalalabhava power plant, which is expected to be 405 gigawatt hours, has been reduced to 70 gigawatt hours. A layer of highly decomposed limestone has been found in the south bank area of the reservoir, and the CEB has prepared a report to completely remove the water from the reservoir and then seal the leaking areas with suitable material. The cabinet approval was granted to implement the proposed project and came to you in Development News.
Development News was brought to you by Quality Matters Than Price. So as an engineer, I recommend Melba RB500. It's made with virgin billets using the latest technology. Melba RB500, number 1 in Sri Lanka. Truly Sri Lankan.
Moving on to sports news, it's cricket first. England captain Joe Root continued his stellar form with yet another magnificent century to flatten India on day 2 of the third test at Headingley. Such has been his insatiable run scoring, it was almost inevitable that Root, playing on his home ground, would compile his third 100 in as many matches and 6th of the year. His majestic 121 helped England to 423 for 8, a humongous lead of 345 over the tourists after India were bowled out for 78 on Wednesday. On to football news. Premier League champions Manchester City have been drawn to face Paris Saint-Germain, RB Leipzig and Club Brugge in the Champions League group stage. Holders Chelsea comes up against Serie A giants Juventus, Russian club Zenit St. Petersburg and Swedish side Malmö. Manchester United face Villarreal, who beat them in last season's Europa League final, as well as Italian club Atalanta and Swiss side Young Boys. Liverpool is in a tough group with Atletico Madrid, Porto and AC Milan. And that came to you in sports news.
Contributory deposit of 1,000 rupees from NSB when your child enters grade 1. Open a Hapan Children's Savings account for your kid today. Higher interest. Conditions apply. Business News. Sponsored by National Savings Bank. The safest place for your money. Seahorse
Yachts Private Limited was registered under the Board of Investment of Sri Lanka recently. The chairman of the BOI Sri Lanka, Mr. Sanjay Mortala, welcomed the investment of approximately $58 million and supported the initiative, which is in line with the Sri Lankan government's yacht industry aspirations. The government of Sri Lanka aims for the future of the maritime tourism industry to develop an internationally esteemed pedigree. The project will create approximately 500 job opportunities, providing a catalyst for the development of the Hambantota area in particular and the Sri Lankan yacht industry at large. That's business news. We look at economic news next.
Business news, sponsored by National Savings Bank, the safest place for your money. Contributory deposit of 1,000 rupees from NSB when your child enters grade 1. Open a Hapan Children's Service account for your kid today. Higher interest. Conditions apply.
In economic news, official data showed Sri Lanka took out 10 billion rupees from the overnight interbank market through a repo auction of 5.77%, slightly above the 5.5% repo window rate. The central bank resumed repo auctions to take out excess liquidity from August 24th after halting them in March 2020. Last week, the central bank also raised policy rates by 50 basis points to 6%, but then placed a ceiling rate of 5.93% on 12-month treasuries, potentially undoing any benefit from the rate hike. The central bank is expected to do some forex swaps with interbank participants to inject some liquidity. The resumption of the repo auctions is a further tightening of policy, but is the second best method to selling down treasury bills outright and permanently sterilizing the rupee to lock the dollars in forex reserves. That came to you in economic news.
Weather report was sponsored by
Dialogue, in partnership with the Ministry of Education, introduces Nanasa, a trilingual educational mobile app with video-based lessons for grade 1 to A-levels. Now your child can study with ease on your mobile with no subscription fee.
The Department of Meteorology forecast the prevailing showery condition over the southwestern part of the island to continue during the next few days. Showers will occur at times in the western, Sabragama, central and northwestern provinces and in the Galle and Matara districts. The Met Department predicts heavy showers above 100 millimeters at some places in the western, Sabragama and central provinces and in the Galle and Matara districts. Furthermore, the forecast predicts showers or thundershowers at a few places in the Uva province and in the Ampara, Batiklau and Hambantota districts in the afternoon. Fairly strong gusty winds up to 40 to 50 kilometers per hour can be expected in the western slope of the Central Hills, northern, north-central, northwestern and southern provinces and in the Trincomalee district. The sea areas, showers will occur at several places in the sea areas extending from Puttalam to Hambantota via Colombo and Galle. Showers or thundershowers may occur at a few places in the sea areas extending from Kankesanturai to Pottuville via Trincomalee in the evening or night. The Met Department requests the naval and fishing communities to be vigilant in this regard.
Weather report was sponsored by
Dialogue, in partnership with the Ministry of Education, introduces Nanasa, a trilingual educational mobile app with video-based lessons for grade 1 to A-levels. Now your child can study with ease on your mobile with no subscription fee.
To conclude this bulletin of news, a recap of the headlines. The Premier emphasizes that the people's support is essential to save the country from the coronavirus epidemic. The decision on extending the lockdown is to be taken today. The national vaccination drive is being ramped up in all districts by the Ministry of Health and the Army. A rise in COVID daily figures due to the New Year cluster. All citizens above 18 years of age to be vaccinated before the end of November. The Speaker of the Parliament signs the COVID-19 Temporary Provisions Bill. The SLBC is ready to promote local banks to attract foreign investments to the country. The US braces for more possible attacks after deadly Kabul blasts. And Joe Root's third century in 3 tests punishes tourists. That concludes this afternoon's news broadcast.